Okay, let's talk miracles. This is a really interesting one. And I'd like to thank a commenter on one of my previous videos who goes by the tag Bullet Sandwich who brought this up. They presented a few different miracles that were, meant to be, look, here are some miracles that are evidence of God's existence. And they presented a few, but I'm only going to talk about one of them because uh, it's much better than the other ones, and by multiple magnitudes. Like if you're gonna approach a miracle, you might as well go with the best one, and that's what this one is. So this miracle that we're talking about is known as the Zeitoun miracle, or sometimes also referred to as the Lady of Zeitoun. And the reason that we can talk about this as like the best is because something clearly did happen here. Not only did many people witness this, officially it's reported that up to 1 million people saw this or witnessed this. But in addition to that, there's photographic evidence of what happened. So let's actually get into the facts of what happened first, and then after we've covered what really did happen or what people saw and what was witnessed, we can then go into certain assumptions that people made of this event or certain interpretations that people have made of what happened. So during the year 19 during the years 1968 to 1971, in the suburb of the city of Cairo, the suburb known as Zeitoun, there is a church. And at night, it was always at night, there was a apparition or a glowing silhouette of a woman dressed in robes that appeared on top of a church in the district of Zeitoun, or the suburb of Zeitoun in Cairo. And it consistently appeared, not every single night, but I think I read somewhere it was during that 3 year period, it appeared 155 nights of that 3 year period where it appeared and showed itself to people. And it was such a big event and such a thing that it would draw in crowds of people that would gather below the church at night to try and capture a glimpse of whatever this thing was that was appearing on top of this church. And so, yeah, so that's what happened. In a nutshell, there was certain claims that various people made in addition to this, but for the most part, that was the most commonly reported thing, is that there was this apparition that was caught on top of the church. It was glowing, it was luminous, it was like bright and lit up, and it took the form of something humanoid, or many people thought it to look like a woman. And the light itself was a combination of blue and white, and many people said that like the robes that this figure was wearing were blue and white, but it couldn't be seen clearly for the most part. Although a very seldom number of people reported to be able to make out a face and make out a figure and all this stuff, the vast majority of people never made this claim. It was just a silhouette of light that appeared. There was no eyes, no nose, no mouth, or at least that could be made out. And so that's what happened. There was all this other additional stuff which goes along with it. Like, for example, people say it was often accompanied by luminous birds flying over top of it or shooting stars. For the most part, this can easily be discredited. There was something that was glowing really bright, and birds do in fact fly at night, so that's not necessarily a miracle of any kind. And if anybody knows anything about shooting stars, they're actually quite common. If you go outside and look up at the sky and just sit there and watch up at the sky, you will see every few minutes or so a shooting star will come across the sky. Shooting stars are not a rare occurrence at all. So, so yeah, that's basically the gist of it. How some people interpreted this was that this was the Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus. And there's a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is that the population of Cairo at the time was majority Muslim, and there was also some Christians. And when you see something like an apparition or whatever, you're going to interpret it based on the worldview that you have already accepted for yourself. So if I'm a Christian and I see some apparition that resembles Mother Mary or resembles a woman, I'm going to be like, that's probably Mother Mary. And Muslims interpreted this as in the same way. They interpret it as Set Mariam, which is, if you know the religion of Islam, they also believe that Jesus, they don't believe he was the Son of God, but they believe he was a prophet who also was born of a virgin, and that's what they refer to as Set Mariam. And so that's who they interpret it to be. But here's the kicker: the church on which this apparition appeared was Saint Mary's Church. And so, like, that was the main reason was, well, this is St. Mary's Church. That must be St. Mary. That must be Mother Mary. And there's also an additional story that goes with it that the guy who originally built the church, which was many, many decades before this happened, he was originally planning on building a hotel in this plot. And as far as the story goes, he was visited by Mary in a dream, and Mary told him to build a church there instead of a hotel. And that's at least the story as to how this came about. So yeah, so lots of people interpreted this as being Mary, right? And we know that there really was something there. Was it Mary? Who knows? But something definitely did happen, because even atheists who were there at the time were witness to this. And so, all right, let's get into some of the counterpoints about why potentially this may not have been the case. Because, it could have been a hoax. It could have been Mary actually presenting herself to everybody. It could have been something else. Nobody really knows for certain, but people have imbued meaning onto this when really there was nothing clear cut about this. Like, the apparition never spoke, it never declared anything to anybody. It never said, like, I am Mary. Everybody assumed that it was Mary, right? And so I'm going to start off with a criticism of this, or a skeptic point to this, which I think is complete bullshit, but I'll cover it anyway. And that is the fact that some people accredit this to mass hysteria. And I don't think this is the case at all. Because because there's photographs, and I don't think that the photographs have been hoaxed at all, because something clearly did happen that was captured on picture, and these photographs were not altered in any way, because many, many different photographers over that period all took their own pictures of what this supposedly was. And although they're all slightly different in some way, it's clear that everybody who was taking a photo during this time was taking a picture of what all appears to be the same thing. And I'll be real, the photos that were taken of this thing that was up on top of the church are a little bit disappointing. But you got to give them because much of these photos are like the old school ghost photos where they show you a picture of something and it's like really not even clear. You cannot clearly see what this thing was. But we'll give them a break, because it was 1968 and not everybody was running around with a camera in their pockets like they are today. So if you were a photographer, you were obviously a professional photographer, and not everybody had like a quality camera back at those days. And in addition to this, they were taking photographs at night of whatever this thing was. And anyone who knows anything about photography knows that you need good lighting to be able to capture a good photo. And when you're trying to take a picture of something which is glowing with, well, the light behind it is all dark, it's very difficult to get a clear picture. So we don't have any clear pictures of what this was, but whatever people were taking a photo of really was there. I don't think the photos were altered in any way, because multiple different photographers all captured the same thing, whatever this thing was. Oh yeah, and sorry, there's one thing I forgot to mention that I probably should have mentioned, is that the head of this thing was so bright and so luminous that it glowed and radiated light off itself outwards. So it kind of looked like the halo, not the ring halo, but like the halo that you often see in religious artwork that like surrounds the head like this. Okay, so yeah, there were definitely photographs of this thing. So was it mass hysteria? No. Was it a hoax? Well, let's look into this. So If it was a hoax, it was a really good hoax because at some point during this whole ordeal, the Egyptian, the Cairo authorities made an attempt to test to see if this was a hoax. And what they did is during one of these appearances of the apparition on top of the church at night, they decided to cut all of the power to that section of the city. So if this was being powered by like lights running off electricity that were running off the grid, when the power went out, the apparition should disappear. And so they tested this. They cut all of the power, but the apparition was still there. So if this was a hoax, it was a very good hoax. Okay, so that is all of the confirmed facts of this case that we can look at and that we know for certain. But even though we now have all of the facts, what about opinions of certain people? What about my personal opinion? What do I think about this case and what it actually was? And even though if it was a hoax, it would have been a very good hoax, my personal opinion, this is not fact, this is just me speaking my opinion, is that I still think this most likely was a hoax. And the reason for me thinking this is that it has all of the hallmarks of a hoax. So, the Church of St. Mary, if you look at pictures of the roof, it's not like a roof that you could stand on and fall off. It wasn't a dangerous. It was like an open courtyard style of a roof. You could probably have up to 1,000 people standing up there safely, and it was surrounded by walls around the outside where this apparition was appearing. So you could have opened up the church at night, invited people and invited people up to the roof. And even if you wanted to have, like, I don't know, maybe just 20 people up there at a time and rotate people around so they could see the apparition up close, because you could see it from down the bottom, down on the street and down the courtyard below the church. But if you really wanted to, like, hey, look, if you want to know for certain that this is real and we're not pulling the wool over your eyes and really know concretely, come up close to it and see for yourself. Like, seeing is believing. But they didn't do that. And if you were pulling some kind of a hoax or some kind of trickery and getting up close to whatever was going on, people would see for themselves that there was some funny business going on. You wouldn't allow people to come up onto the roof, and that to me is kind of like, yeah, there must have been something going on, because that's something they definitely could have done that they didn't do. And that aside, there are some testimonies and some claims that certain priests and people of the church came up onto the roof and got a good look at it. And in addition to that, I've seen this claimed multiple times online, and I've looked for the life of me and couldn't find the actual evidence of it. But I've seen it stated many times that journalists and photographers, specific journalists and photographers, were invited into the church and up onto the roof to see the apparition up close and take pictures of it up close. And supposedly there's also video footage of the apparition up close from the roof itself. And I looked and I could not for the life of me find it. So if this footage and these photos do exist out there and you know where they are, please do link them, because I couldn't find them. And in addition to that, there was also some. I do believe this was the case, although I couldn't find the footage of this either, because it was such a big story at the time. Local news channels, local TV news channels, covered the story and had footage of the apparition, although it wasn't from on top of the roof. It was from like down in the courtyard, looking up at it. But I couldn't find that either. So if anyone has any knows where to find that footage, please do link it and I'll pin it in the comments, because I really looked for like a couple of hours for this and it doesn't seem to exist anywhere on the internet. Alright, but here's the kicker, and I've left it right until the very end of the video to mention this, but this whole thing happened again in 2009. Again, something very bright appeared on top of the church of St. Mary. And again, people showed up in masses to see it. And this time you actually can look up on YouTube and find footage of this, although it is 2009 cell phone camera footage. But you can more clearly get an idea of what was going on. And to me personally, and I think to a lot of people would agree with me, that it's a bunch of lights set up on top of the church. And again, nobody was allowed up on top of the church to get a close look at what was going on. Everybody gathered in crowds down the bottom, and you could only view whatever this was looking up. And these lights were so bright that the cameras couldn't clearly make out what it was. But I imagine that even if you were standing down there looking with your own eyes, you still wouldn't be able to make out for certain what it was, because it was really bright. It was like floodlights bright. But one of the differences, and I think is very obvious from looking at the differences between the old photos and the new video, is that whatever this thing was more recently in 2009 up on top was much, much bigger than the original. So the original would have been about human size, but this new one, it was really tall, like 2 or 3 stories tall. It was humanoid in the same way, but it was massive. So whatever this thing was that they were capturing on video, it clearly wasn't the same thing. It was some kind of a new setup. So yeah, make of that what you will. To me, it's just the whole thing's a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about this. But even the more recent stuff, even the Catholic Church and many different Christians themselves are not sure about this. And I know that even if this new, more recent version actually was a hoax, it doesn't mean that the original one was a hoax. But this whole thing just hasn't. I'm not sure what to make of it, kind of thing. It just seems off. The whole thing just seems really off. But that's just my opinion. Um, Please let me know what you think about this whole thing down in the comments, and stay honest, and I'll see you in the next one.